it.
Amazing. Okay, so employment ethics in the birth world. We're talking all things sort of employees versus contractors, ethics
Mhm.
as a birth worker, ethics as scaling a small business when you care about the people who work for you.
Yeah.
And we're having this conversation because I'm trying to figure this out running Birth Murder. And you, Kristen, are a lawyer who is helping us. So would you introduce yourself in a longer way?
Yeah, sure. I'm Kristen Roberts. I am a business, intellectual property, and employment attorney. So I do sort of general counsel work for my clients. And I've done this for, gosh, going on 15 years now. So it's been a long time. A lot of experience. I have a firm, so I have a whole team. We're Trestle Law. We sort of help our clients, get to where they want to be, help build them that bridge, right? That's the trestle kind of imagery. And yeah, I mean, I think a lot of this comes down to our help, at least in terms of what we do for our clients, is we really want to make sure that they feel supported with what they need and they get timely help and they get affordable help because it can be very costly. But you do get what you pay for when it comes to this work, unfortunately.
I mean, I think that cost is gonna be a big thing that we talk about in general because, um, everybody should be investing to some extent in legal fees to make sure that you're set up correctly, however you're doing that, and I think there's just a misconception for anybody who owns a small business that you can, like, cut corners, and I guess that maybe sometimes you can, like, if you're a super solo entrepreneur and you don't really work with
Yeah.
anyone, but most of the time you need some legal protections to, like, sleep
Yeah.
at night for me.
Yeah, and there are ways to sort of I don't like calling them cut corners, but there are ways to sort of decide what areas you want to invest in and what areas you don't. And I remember when we first started talking, you were like, "Oh, I think I need all of this all this different work done." And I said, "Well, I think you should actually be investing your money over here, not on these other things that aren't actually going to help grow your business or protect you any more than you're already protected." So I think that there are ways to I think that's the way you're going to cut costs. I don't think it's cutting the actual cost of the work that needs to be done. I think it's figuring out what work needs to be done now, what work can wait a little bit, and not overexpose you, and what work you can maybe, space out over the next year or so.
So let's just dive into talking about like employment because that's one of the biggest things that we have done differently. And so the backstory there, I think I told you this like a year ago when we started working together, but for everybody listening, is my background in this career was as a postpartum doula and a birth doula, and then a childbirth educator, and I worked for a number of small businesses that basically operated as agencies or hired educators as independent contractors. And so they were like, we've got a class for you that you can go and teach. And then, they paid me to do that work. And there was very little oversight and direction. And that meant that, like, I could ask for a higher rate for my class, but I couldn't like get a raise necessarily. I had no protection within the company. I wasn't paid to attend team meetings. I wasn't paid for professional development. Um, and I think at some point when folks asked me to teach more or take on more responsibilities or do things for free, I didn't understand what I was working to build, right? Like I wasn't invested and I didn't feel necessarily taken, like nobody was taking care of me from that perspective. And when I set out to start Birth Murder, one of the things I really wanted to create was a team of birth workers who felt like we were all in it together and there
Mhm.
was some way that the company was looking out for them. And I think that you can create an amazing company culture with independent contractors. And I think you can have a terrible company culture when you have employees. So it's not cut or dry, but can you explain the difference and why a company would hire folks as one or the other, since most of the time companies are hiring both for different roles?
Yeah, and I really want to make it clear that there's no right reason or wrong reason to hire an independent contractor versus an employee. The reasons are oftentimes financial for a lot of business owners. What I can't afford, a lot of business owners have the misconception that they cannot afford to hire an employee, because when they think about hiring an employee, they think that they need to have all of the money it would cost for that employee's salary, right? So a lot of times you hear when you ask somebody, well, how much would it cost you to hire that person? They're like, well, I'd pay them 60 or $70,000 a year. And I'm like, but you don't need 60 or $70,000 a year to hire an employee. You need really $0, because ideally that position will be engineered to make the company money, to make the business more profitable, because you're buying time back by having that full-time employee do work that you're not able to do, or that and you can spend time doing other things. So in terms of hiring a contractor, contractors are really best hired for sort of piecemeal work. When you have something where you've got one class that you're offering and you're maybe doing it one time, and you need them to do one piece of it, and they come in and they do that one job for that one piece, and that's about it. Or maybe they're doing two or three different pieces, but each one is like a separate contract. That's really where you're going to be best suited in hiring a contractor. But when you need somebody who's there, who's present, who's going to show up on time, you're going to say, hey, I need you to do this class or this course. I need you to do this at this time on this day. I need you to deliver it this way. I need you to report back to me. I need you to have meetings with me, follow up. That's really where it starts to get murkier, and it starts to look more like an employee situation, and where you're likely be better off hiring that person as an employee.
So that's what I came to understand is so much of it is about how you can, I think, dictate seems like a bad word for it, but, like, if you're controlling the work, the when, where, sort of how work that somebody is doing, then they are much more in an employee role versus an independent contractor role.
Right, control becomes really important.
Yeah,
It's like how the work is controlled. It's not just how the work is controlled, but it's the delivery of the work, the method of delivering that work, as well as the time associated with that person doing the work. So if you get to dictate when, how, and where that work is performed, you're really looking more like an employee than an independent contractor. And a lot of people
yeah.
really try to squish what should be an employee into an independent contractor role.
And okay, so from my perspective is that you do that because hiring an employee is much more expensive than hiring an independent contractor.
Yeah, and it can be expensive when if you're hiring an employee for the wrong reasons, right? If you're hiring them to do something you're already doing and they don't actually take anything off your plate, if you're hiring them to do something and you don't interview them well, you don't find the right person and they don't work out, that can be costly, right? Because it is a sunk cost if you're investing in that person for a couple of weeks and they don't work out. But to actually hire an employee, it doesn't cost anything. It's free to hire an employee, because maybe you need 2 weeks to get them up to speed, 3 weeks to get them up to speed. So maybe you need a couple of weeks of their salary to cover. But if you are running a profitable business and if your business is trying to grow, you are going to need people to work for you, and hiring employees is the better way to do it than hiring independent contractors. It just is.
So, I mean, I agree. That's where we're at. But there are how would you describe it? Like the hidden cost or the back end costs of things like workers' compensation, and unemployment insurance, and so sort of paying in from a tax perspective there.
Right. Well, unemployment insurance you pay into from the employer side of your taxes. So you don't actually like buy unemployment insurance. It
Yeah.
it comes out of you as an employer. So you do pay taxes, and depending on the state you're in, right? You may pay income tax, you may pay state tax as well as federal tax. So there are taxes to consider in paying yourself as an employee. But ideally, every business owner should be paying themselves as an employee too. So you should technically be on payroll, because that also lowers your overall taxable income and it allows you to adjust things from a tax perspective. Now, obviously, I'm not a tax attorney. I work with tax attorneys though, and this is what I've learned in my experience of running my business for over a decade. So, I'm an employee. I'm a W 2 employee. I get a salary in my
Mm.
firm. And so because I get a salary, because I'm paid W-2 wages, I also pay into my state programs. So for example, when COVID hit, I was able to get, if I needed to lay myself off, I could collect unemployment.
Yeah.
When I went on maternity leave because I had a kid, I was able to get paid by the state to go on maternity leave. So all of these things, yeah, you're paying taxes, there's hidden costs. So yeah, I need to get workers' compensation insurance, but if you're already doing those things for yourself, which you should be used to what that cost looks like, and it's just adding one more person. And ideally, again, when you hire an employee, you should never just hire somebody without a plan for that employee to bring money back into the company.
Yeah.
That's the whole point is, well, what are they going to make me? What am I going to pay them? And if the numbers don't pencil out, meaning if you have to pay somebody way more in salary than they're actually going to make the company, then that position isn't engineered well and you shouldn't hire that employee for that position.
What's the phrase you guys use for trestle law that's like you're building the bridge to profitability, or you have a tagline that's about making
Yeah.
money?
Yeah, it's building the bridge from your brand to your bank account. So we look
Yeah.
at the word brand, everybody just thinks the name, but your brand is so much more than just your name.
Yeah.
It's the way you run your business, it's your goodwill, it's your reputation. And when you run a business, the consumers, you have to think about consumer reputation, right? Obviously, how you deliver the services. But as you become more and more busy, you are not going to be able to deliver that same quality of service. And what business owners get into the cycle of is they get busy, they get super booked, then they have to deliver the work. And then when they deliver the work, then they get slow because they're not out there marketing to get more work because they're doing the work.
Yeah.
So if you hire somebody to either do the marketing or deliver the work, it takes that piece off and your business starts to get that sort of flywheel effect
Yeah.
where things keep going and you wind up seeing, oh, that actually makes me money as opposed to costing me money.
Well, it's really interesting because I would venture to guess, like I'm thinking of, let's say, 10 people who I know are watching the recording, who have their own, they're like an LLC solo
Yeah.
practitioner, and they're on the like cusp of like, do we bring somebody in for sales and marketing? Do I bring in another practitioner if I'm in sort of like the health and wellness space, or do
Yeah.
I keep working for myself? And I know that they're not paying themselves as employees. I know that they're just like taking money out and it's not particularly organized. And I remember the milestone probably in like late 2022, where I worked with a friend of mine, Jen Mayer, who has a company, a financial coaching company called, it started as parental leave. So it was fully funded by 40 weeks. And now it's just we are fully funded. And she helps small business owners sort of figuring out their budgeting and accounting. And I remember working with her saying, okay, I've paid myself the same amount of money consistently for 6 months in a row. And then it was like, I've paid myself consistently for 12 months in a row. And then I switched over and I was like, and now I'm paid as an employee. And those were all such huge milestones from what started as, yeah, let me do this thing once a month and I don't know where it's going to go,
Sure,
which
sure.
has turned into like a C corp with employees in 4 states.
Mhm.
And
Yep. Yep.
yeah,
But I think that there's this misnomer or this misunderstanding that you have to pay yourself the same amount of money every month.
yeah,
As if you're the only owner of your business and you are the only employee in your business, you can pay yourself whatever
whatever.
salary you want. The IRS only wants to see that you run payroll once a year. So before I had any
Mm,
employees in my law firm and it was just me, I ran payroll quarterly. So I would write myself a check every month, but I would just keep track of what that amount was. And I tried to pay myself the same amount every month, but some months I did better and some months I did worse. And so
yeah,
some months I would pay myself more and some months I would pay myself less. And then my payroll company would reach out to me by the end of the quarter and they would say, hey, Kristen, it's time to run the payroll. How much did you pay yourself? And I'll tell them, this is how much I paid myself. And they'll say, okay, well, do you want that to be net or gross?
yeah,
And usually I would say, I want that to be my net pay. So they'd say, okay, well, we need this much to be available for taxes. And they would just pull the taxes out and pay the taxes that way. So you can be an employee, but if these people are taking, or if they're LLCs and they're just taking money whenever, they
Yeah.
really should be accounting for how much money they're taking in a quarter, even if it's just quarterly, and they don't have somebody on payroll. They need to get used to what that feels like, because it feels less scary when you go to hire your first employee.
Yeah, I think that that's absolutely right. And it's something that I wish, I got the advice very early on to like do my own books and keep my
Mhm.
financials like very close so I could understand the cash flow. And I wish I had brought in a bookkeeper and a payroll processor early, not to like outsource it to some big software that felt generic. And I'm
Mhm.
basically doing it myself anyway, but someone who's really like a strategic advisor to say, hey, here's how you could be doing this better. Because I think there are a ton of missed opportunities for owners where you could then get the freedom, right? And here's our plan for bringing the next hire on and then the next hire after that.
Right, that's exactly right, and, I did the same thing. So I used to do all my books when I first started my firm, and I would do them on Sundays. So I would sit with my computer and I would try to square up my trust account, and I remember one day I was, like, 30 cents off, and I couldn't figure out why I was 30 cents off on my account, and I was like, "This is not I needs to be perfect. Why am I
Yeah.
missing?" I'd spent something like 4 or 5 hours trying to reconcile
Yeah.
this 30 cents that I was missing, 40 cents. And I was so frustrated that I wanted to just throw my computer against the wall.
Yeah.
And finally, my husband comes over and he goes, "How long have you been at this?" And I was like, 5 hours. And he goes, "And what's your hourly rate again?" And I told him at the time, and he goes, "Yeah, you could have hired like 3 bookkeepers to
Yeah.
take care of this for you." So that also really put it into perspective for
Yeah.
me. And so the first hire I made was a bookkeeper. I was
Yeah.
like, and that was an independent contractor because they ran their own business, right?
Yep.
So when somebody
Exactly.
has their own business, they're doing something that's not the core work of your business. That's really where an independent contractor is going to be important, is going to make sense.
Yeah, right, and our bookkeeper is still an independent contractor because that's like a very clean outsourcing
Right.
relationship. But so one thing you said that I wanna go back to is paying yourself as an employee allowed you to tap into state programming,
Mhm.
and
It
that
did.
was a huge thing for us because Birth Smarter started in New York right around the time that New York passed paid parental leave.
Yep.
And it was like scaling up. At first, it was 6 weeks of paid leave, and then it was 10 weeks, and then it was 12 weeks. And I knew that now, and this is like my heart and soul and passion behind this, is that caregiving is not treated as a career ever, right? Like just
Right.
like historically women of color do caregiving work under the table. They're paid cash or they're paid as employees and daycares and as nannies and things like that, but for an incredibly low wage. And so birth workers, postpartum doulas, and birth workers started falling into that same category. They're trained and then they're let go to manage not just being an incredible caregiver but to figure out all of the back end accounting. And that means that if you as a caregiver have a baby, you have to fund your own leave. There's nothing provided to you.
Right.
And so the question I asked myself was like, can't there be a way for companies to value these people and primarily women, right, who are doing this work and pay them in a way that they get benefits that most other career professionals get? So, what has your experience been like? And you're in California, so there's even more there. What has your experience been like for employers working in different states and with the changes in state programs and benefits?
Yeah, so I think the best thing for people that I personally think that if you're working as a freelancer, an independent contractor, anything like that, where the businesses are just not going to hire you as an employee, but you've
Yeah.
got multiple clients, it just makes sense for you to set up a business entity. It does not make sense for you to get 5 different 1099s. We have a long-term contractor in our firm who does incredible work, and they have their own corporation, that
Mm,
takes all, and so that's how they get their own benefit. And yeah, it's expensive, but they have more freedom. So if you want more time freedom, if you want more control and say, especially people that are parents,
yeah.
oftentimes parents need a lot of flexibility that companies are, that's sort of a point of contention in a lot of businesses is businesses want your time and attention 40 hours a week. And especially if, full-time job, they want you 40 hours a week. I know as a business owner, I want my people 40 hours a week if they're going to be working for me and I need their time and attention.
Yeah.
And so that, but that can create some friction when you've got kids and stuff going on. And so having contractors who are properly classified as contractors, but who have other clients, who do
Mm.
other projects, that run a business structure and have a business entity for that money to go into, can actually wind up paying less in taxes, because just getting 1099 wages will cost you in the long run, because you're going to have to pay taxes on all of that money that comes in. And a lot of people don't know how to account for that
Yeah.
up front. Whereas you're already paying your taxes if you set yourself up as an LLC and you elect to be taxed as an S corporation, let's say.
Mhm.
And you become then put on payroll, you pay yourself a commercially reasonable salary, and then you're allowed to start taking things as draws. And that opens up write-offs, that opens up different, so you get different things as a business owner. And I saw a statistic that said something about something like 50 or 60% of people of work are going to become freelance in the next, like, by 2028. And so I really do think people need to get with the idea that you can still make a really decent wage running a business, even though you may be paying things like salary, payroll, because you're
Yeah.
then paying in. You have to think of it as, I'm paying payroll, running payroll. Yes, that's a cost, but that cost goes into other programs,
Yeah.
like, and you can do cool things when you're the only employee. So when you're the only employee, you can do, like, you can adjust your salary to meet the max amount of leave requirement for that look back period, so that you can max out your benefits with the state. You can do that. You can do things where you can kind of adjust things to make it look the way it needs to look. Nothing says that you have to have a salary for a year. It's just for that look back period. So as
Yeah.
long as you time it right, there are ways that you can maximize your benefits, you can maximize your retirement, you can do things like SEP IRAs, you can do things like, there's a lot of different retirement vehicles. And so I know a lot of people are thinking, oh, they really want to rely on a business to
Yep.
provide them those things. But sometimes businesses, you can't find what you're looking for. And you really want that flexibility, that control. And business ownership, I think, is one of the best ways to do it. But so many freelancers don't think of themselves as business owners.
Well, and I think that that's true for freelancers like bookkeepers and graphic designers, and then for our world, their doulas, right? You have an honest to goodness caretaker who did
Yeah,
not set out to be a business owner,
right.
right? Who like set out to work in a field of providing empathy and compassion and support. And now there's a very, very steep learning curve. But
Mhm.
actually, I'm thinking back to myself 10 years ago. I'm thinking back to so many people that I work with, and I don't know, as independent doulas, birth or postpartum doulas, how they're managing getting paid, themselves. And the other thing that's interesting about that is a lot of doulas that we work with at Birth Smarter are part of agencies, and some of
Mhm.
them are like, okay, you get hired and paid by the agency, and some of
Yep.
them are just referral agencies. So the doula themselves is taking the money, but then they're paying 10-15%
Mhm.
back. And that exact arrangement can happen if you're getting, your LLC is getting paid, or paying back. It doesn't just have to be like you as this person getting the
That's right.
wages.
That's right. The other thing that, a lot of people don't think about, we were talking about hidden costs. Some other costs that you might want to consider, especially if you're providing a service where you're physically working with people, you may need like errors and emissions coverage. So that's kind of like, would be the equivalent of malpractice in my
Yeah.
world. And that can be costly.
Yeah.
And so, if you are working with a company, even if you're a contractor, I would try to at least get them to account for the fact that you're going to have to cover your own insurance, and see if you can increase your wage that way. So a lot of it's going to be, but even so, even if you are working, very few doulas and birth workers get hired as employees within organizations.
Almost
Um,
never.
Almost never, almost never.
Yeah.
And so because of that, they are always going to be put in this position of not having these sort of chops of business ownership. They
Yeah.
don't have that. They never went into the field to say, "Hey, I'm going to become a business owner." They
Yeah.
went to the field thinking, "I want to help people." And I relate a lot to that because law firms lawyers are the same way. We're not taught business in law
Right.
school. We're not taught how to get clients or run businesses, or we're taught how to argue the law, how to synthesize the law, how to read a statute and extrapolate from it. That's what we're taught.
Mm.
And so a lot of us go out into the world thinking, well, I need to go get a job at a law firm and then they'll pay me a lot of money, which by the way is not true. If you are not graduating top of your class at a top law school, finding work at a big law firm where they pay you a lot of money is actually really hard. Most lawyers make, when I was starting out, it was like 50 grand. It wasn't a lot of money. It wasn't, it was enough to live, but
Yeah.
it was barely, I wasn't saving a lot. I wasn't doing a lot. And then I got to the point in my career where I realized, well, if all I'm going to do is try to make partner, right? Because you're put on this like idea that like I just need to work for a company and then I'll work my way up in the company and then eventually I'll get promoted and I'll get all of this money and then, and then it'll be gravy. But if part of the promotion requires that you bring in work, then why wouldn't you just do it for yourself?
Yeah.
And that's kind of, I see a similar, if the doulas are working for agencies or places, that's okay. It's okay to start yourself out that way. But so much of what birth workers do is based on network, is based on who you know, is based on doing a quality job for your clients,
Yep.
and you will then get more people sending you and your name out there.
Yeah.
So and then you'll get repeat clients for multiple children, or multiple births. It's and then you start to call people. So there's a method to developing business that isn't really hard, but you have to be willing to constantly ask for it, ask for it, ask for it, and that can be challenging for people who are there as helpers, right? A lot of
Yeah.
helpers don't like to ask for things that they need because they're helpers.
And I think that was a real decision that I thought about, right? Was I could have continued just teaching my own classes for me and doing that. Like I ask for referrals and then I wait 2 years and then folks come back to take another class or they hire me again. And I mean, I know career birth workers who have done that so beautifully.
Mhm.
And they're the ones who are barely on the internet because they don't need to be. They don't need to do the marketing
Yep.
anymore. And so there are certainly some young people starting out in this profession who are going to go that path and they're going to make it work. And then the reality is there are some folks who don't are not good at or just don't want to, right? Their cup is not filled when they're doing the back end admin and
Right.
figuring that out. And the beauty of getting paid at the end of the day. And then the other plus sides, like for us, for our employees, are and I'll just say, birth smarter educators are not full time employees.
Right.
They are classified as employees, and some of them work 6 hours a month, right? They just teach one class. But for that 6 hours, they are showing up in their role as a very part time employee. They get benefits like every time we have a team meeting, they're paid to attend and they're paid
Yep.
to contribute and they're paid to fill out their evaluations and they're paid for professional development. And so the perk of what they're getting with us is consistent consistent employment that they don't have to go out and hustle for,
Yep.
right? We're saying if you have 4 couples in the class or 10 couples in the class, you're going to get paid the same.
Yep.
We're going to make sure that we're paying the unemployment insurance and workers' compensation.
Yep.
And we're going to give you a group of people who you otherwise wouldn't have access to because we tend to do this work in silos.
Yeah.
And then it can get very, very lonely. And
Mhm.
I guess part of what I'm wondering too, this is a little bit of a transition, is just having like a political conversation, both in general in the United States and also like, hey, it's May of 2025 and what does that mean? But like, to what extent, when it comes to taking care of our employees and benefits as small business owners, are we, um, you know, I don't know if this is the right perspective. I'm gonna ask it like it's coming to me, and then you just tell me, but, like, to what extent are employers showing up as a Band-Aid for, societal support that potentially could be coming from the government?
Well, I think so I don't that's a hard question to answer because there are a lot of things that I think when we say companies do for their client or for their
Yeah.
employees, the companies for the most part benefits don't come from companies. We pay a portion. So
Yeah.
employers pay a small portion as part of their employment tax. So we get taxed for stuff and then some of that comes out of, some of those benefits come out of the employment taxes. I But we get to write those off, right? Those are, all of our employment stuff becomes a direct write off to us as business owners. What I think, if the governments or if governments want companies to do more for their employees and they think that this should be on the private sector side, I think that we need to incentivize employers more.
Mm.
Meaning, instead of saying it's just going to come out of the employer has to provide leave. Well, incentivize us to provide the leave. Give us three times the write off if we send somebody on a paid parental leave. Give us true tax benefits to actually help us, because the problem is right now anything that we give to our employees is just a direct write off,
Yeah.
whereas there are tax strategies that give us twice the deductions that have nothing to do with our employees. So, for example, if I want to give like an education credit to one of my employees, I can do that. That's a write off for me. But if I want to go and invest money in a fee simple and put money into land, and then I donate that land right to a charitable trust or charitable foundation, I get a way bigger charitable deduction for that than I do to actually help my employees. So, right now, the way that our tax system is set up, the way that our government is set up, we don't incentivize corporations and employers to actually meaningfully help employees. We require them to do the bare minimum, because it's already built into the taxes. And I think that businesses wouldn't mind paying more if they got tangible benefits as a result of them paying more.
Yeah, it's really interesting because I think that, like, you're identifying this sort of, like, this gap in these like small to mid-sized businesses where there are like sort of interesting benefits of being like, you are a solopreneur, you have an LLC, you figure out how to pay yourself, like everything we talked about, where you can sort of make the system work for you. And then obviously there are huge tax incentives for like huge companies that are figuring out how to pay no money. And then there are folks like me, right? And you and I have 14 employees and haven't found all these loopholes. So
Yeah,
everything is a direct write off, but there's nothing that there really isn't. I just feel like I think about this all the time with my employees, especially part-time folks. I'm paying like the added benefit into taxes, which is negligible, but it adds up for part-time
it does.
employees.
Yeah, it
And that's the
does.
other thing is like if you're paying somebody 50 to $150,000 a year, $10 a month, whatever. But if I'm only paying somebody $200 in the month because that's all they worked, and then their Google Workspace is $8, and just to pay them on our payroll processing is $6 a month,
Mhm.
and just to have them show up for a meeting is $50, all of a sudden they haven't made the company any money.
That's right. That's right. And so you have to be really careful for those roles. You have to make sure that you're engineering not just how much they're going to make, but what the cost of that overhead is. So
Yeah.
you have to say, okay, for every employee, these are the hard costs that go with that employee in hiring them. Okay, great.
Okay. Can you transition that actually and say more about employee handbooks? Because that was the biggest project that we worked together on. And that's where there were the even more hidden costs that I was like, wait, I have to reimburse them for their cell phone and their internet and their
Yeah.
computer.
Yeah. Well,
So,
and it does depend. It does
yeah,
depend on what laws you're applying. So California is probably one of the strictest. And so if you're going to go, and so a lot of times what employers will do is they'll just say, well, I've got four employees in California, even though I'm not in California, they're going to get a California law applied. So we might as well just have us comply with California.
yeah,
You really have to do a cost benefit analysis to make sure that that is okay or accurate, because
yeah,
California requires, like, I have to reimburse my employees for their internet and their cell phone use because they work from home.
Yep.
And I asked that they put Teams on their phone and have their email on their phone. And I asked them, so I
Yep.
asked them to be plugged in. And if they're using their cell phones at all for work, and that's the expectation, then I have to reimburse them for that use.
Yep.
There's different ways to do it, but in terms of handbooks, yeah, I mean, you've got to stay within labor code requirements, and the labor code says, for California at least, anything that the employee uses that's their personal thing that benefits the employer has to reimburse them for that. You also have to reimburse them for any kind of travel costs, any kind of, hey, can you go mail this out for me? You have to pay them back for that stuff.
Yeah. And we just, you know this, but what we did, and advice I would give to anybody who's in a position of being, again, a similar size, sort of small, mid-sized business who's considering scaling. And in our um, whether this is smart or not, when COVID hit, I was like, we can hire the best people from anywhere, not realizing that then we had to follow each state's individual employment laws.
Yeah, or at least know what they are,
Right.
because because some states will give you an advantage. So
Yeah.
at some, like, for example, in Texas, if you have something where you've written down in a contract with them saying that when they leave, they don't get any of their PTO paid out, you don't have to pay them out for PTO. Now, I don't know if you would want to do that, right? So
Yeah.
this is like, how tight do you need to run your business? Sometimes that comes down to how small your margins are,
Yeah.
right? And I get that. Some businesses just don't have the margins to be able to afford to give all of the benefits in the world. Now, California, you can't do that. If
Yeah.
you give somebody PTO, that's their PTO. You can't say, oh, you better use it or lose it. You can't have a use it or lose it policy in California. You
Yeah.
also have to be careful with how you draft independent contractor agreements in California. You can't have work made for hire provisions because it imputes employee status onto them. So there's a lot of like little weird intricacies about the different states. But what some businesses will do, and I don't usually recommend this for smaller businesses, they'll have different handbook addendas
Yep.
for different states.
Yep.
So, you've got your main, these are our general policies regarding sexual harassment, et cetera, et cetera. And then you have a little insert for, like, pregnancy and disability leave in California, pregnancy and disability leave in Wisconsin, pregnancy and disability leave in Texas, pregnancy and disability leave in Florida. And you'll have your sort of like insert with all of the different laws and how they apply. But that's a pain for small businesses to manage. So hiring businesses went national when COVID hit because nobody wanted to go into an office, and
Yeah.
people still don't. That's a huge perk now because a lot of businesses are requiring that you come back.
Yep. Yeah. I think
So,
that so we, when we had this discussion for Birth Smarter, I and it's so interesting being a business owner. I will just say, as somebody with like very, very strong principles, and principles that like predate being a business owner, of just being like in the field of political science, caring a lot about employment practices. That's why we're doing the conversation on May Day. Like, I genuinely love workers' rights and labor protection, and shudder to think of the world we would be in without the labor movement. And watching my own journey of like cringing at certain things, then being in the position of an employer, is really interesting. But what I chose to do, is follow California law and San Diego law in particular, and create a handbook that was as favorable to workers as possible. And ultimately, then, this is not a decision everybody either can or wants to make. But for us, it was, if we can't make it profitable, assuming all of our full team is in San Diego, right, which is the most worker friendly place, then it's probably not worth it to be doing this work. Like, then we have to figure out a different business model,
mhm.
because those are the values that we have in the company, and that way we don't have to manage the headache of having employee handbooks for different employees as we scale.
Yeah.
And I think
And
it's
maybe in the
just, yeah,
future, as you scale, that will change.
yep,
Maybe in the future, as you scale, you'll have more opportunity to start looking directly. It might become more profitable for you to do it that way. And unfortunately, I think I think as employees, when we work as employees, we have a different perspective than when we become business owners.
Yeah.
Because as an employee, as a worker, as somebody just kind of moving through the world,
Yeah.
it's really easy to align yourself with workers' rights. And I believe in them as well with,
Yep.
labor movements. I think they're super important. I'm very, very supportive of unions. I think that, we're losing them. I think it's super important. And at the same time, as a
Yeah.
business owner, you realize the only reason a business exists is to make money.
Yep.
That's why I don't think a government should be run like a business, but that's
Yep.
just me. Because that's the only reason is to profit, is to make profit for the shareholders, the
Yeah.
owners. That's the only reason businesses exist. There's no You can have a nonprofit, obviously there's different types of businesses, but for profit business entities are literally there to make money. That's it.
Yeah.
That's the mission of the I mean, if you read bylaws of a corporation or an operating agreement, it's all about how the money goes, how you can transfer ownership, it's all about money. There's
It
nothing like,
is.
and we want to save the world. There's nothing like that. If that was in there, then you'd be a nonprofit.
Yeah, and I think there's like a generation of business owners, right, that I'm in, which is like, what does it mean to be socially responsible?
Yes.
What does it mean to be employee focused, to be human focused? And so much of this goes into a whole other conversation about HR side of thing and company
Yeah.
culture and, how can we create a place where people want to work, where your employees feel seen and valued and protected. While at the end of the day, you know that you have the cash flow to manage your operating
That's right.
expenses. And the
Right.
stress of finding that line
It's hard.
is really, really hard. And I think, I've seen it. My last year has been very interesting because I've seen it from both sides where there we don't get enough credit for the fact that our educators are employees, and it's one of the biggest differentiators for Birth Smarter because if you go take a childbirth education class almost anywhere else, there's no oversight in what that individual educator is teaching. There's nobody saying, hey, that recommendation actually changed 5 years ago, don't teach that anymore.
Mhm.
And so I it is in the structure of our business to make sure that we are the most evidence based and up to date and that you're
Yeah.
getting a curriculum that you can trust. So the employee status is like essential to the service we
I
provide
think
and
so
being
too.
cutting
Yeah.
age, or cutting edge. But the flip of it is that I had one of our best educators and a good friend of mine who said to me ultimately, I don't want you to control how I teach.
Yeah.
Like I'm really good at this. I'm doing my thing and I
Yeah.
don't want to be an employee because you're telling me that I have to teach this way and then I can't, go teach for another company at the same time and be competitive. And I was like, I get it. Like, I did that too. I left, other organizations to do my own thing, and that's what's right for different personalities.
Mhm.
But I think what I'm hopeful about in women's health and parental health in general is that there are more companies that at least seem interested in taking care of the people who work there,
Yeah.
but it does still seem like it's not enough. It still seems like a lot of people are starting companies where like, of course, it's for profit, but I don't want owners in this space to be exploiting the caregivers in order to make that profit.
Yeah. And it does seem like there is this challenge in, I think the birth worker industry, I think it's a difficult industry when it comes to getting paid your worth, because again, the majority of birth workers are helpers.
Yeah,
And they go to people who are in a vulnerable position, and they want to do and then they bond with them. So a lot of it's personalized work too, where
yeah,
you get to know the person that you're working with very intimately, and you become a part of their life for a period of time. And that starts to it feels difficult to say, okay, now pay me this much,
yeah,
right? There's sort of that disconnect. You have to sort of take off your birth worker hat, put on the business person hat, then take off the business person hat and put on the birth worker hat. And that transition can feel really uncomfortable for a lot of birth workers.
yeah,
So they would rather just undercut the price. They would rather just not get paid. They
yeah,
would rather just not chase after the money and just say, "Oh well, it's fine. At least I helped."
yeah,
And that will leave them burnt out.
It does leave them burnt out. That's what happens, and, what I will say is, like, my greatest, peace of mind came when I had hired somebody to sort of be like a general project manager, chief of staff, and, Lauren LaRoe, who many people at Birth Murder or in our universe know, and she has stepped in now to being the lead when it comes to payroll questions, refund questions, like,
Yeah,
she's the go-between, right? So if any of my employees come to me and they have a question about what they're
you're
getting
like,
paid, if any of our clients come to me and they have a
"Yeah,
question about what they're paying, I'm like, "Oh, I'm so sorry." That's not
that's
me,
not
and
me."
that's like a very helpful person to have when
Yeah.
you are the facilitator of the service.
And to your point, there are so many other ways to get started than a full-time employee. There are overseas agencies that, pay people well enough to live.
Yeah,
You may not think it's enough for here, but some places, you're paying instead of paying, 25, $30 an hour, you're paying, 15 to
yeah,
$20 an hour. And that's still a very good wage.
yep,
And they cover all of the payroll taxes, they cover the insurance, and those people in other countries get government backed healthcare, government backed. So they get the benefits through their government anyways. So hiring somebody like an OBM or a virtual assistant just to do that kind of work, if you're not able to collect, can be
mhm.
hugely helpful.
I think it's a really good point that, like, in globalizing a workforce, it doesn't inherently make it unethical.
That's
And there's
right.
actually really important conversations around that with everything happening with like tariffs. And I think it's just like that we need to name racism, right? Name racism in economic policy and globalization
Yeah.
because just because something is made in China doesn't mean it's low quality, doesn't mean it's made
Right.
in a sweatshop, right? Like you can have a global workforce and treat people well, but it does require business owners to be very intentional and diligent about knowing who they're working with and why.
That's right, and also interviewing people well, I think that's why if you're going to go that route, working with an agency is a really good idea because they vet, they hire, they give training. So you're working with a reputable company as opposed to trying to just go find somebody on the internet because that can also be there's a lot of scams too
Yeah.
online. So you have to be careful with that kind of stuff when you're doing direct hiring. And then there's also, you got to get them set up to receive payment. Whereas working with an agency, working with a company that has,
Yeah.
effectively it's like a temp working worker agency. They send the person to you, you do interviews, they schedule all of it for you. And then they're the ones that take care of the hiring and firing if it doesn't work out either.
Yeah.
So that makes it really easy, really straightforward, no muss, no fuss. And I also agree with you. Just because something comes from overseas, just because somebody's working overseas, one doesn't make it exploitative.
Yeah.
And number two, doesn't make it low quality. There
Yeah.
are some of the smartest, most well educated people working overseas that we're trying to bring here, quite
Yeah.
frankly, and I would even go venture a step further to say that one of the things that we're actually really struggling with in the United States is this whole reshoring idea. So everybody thinks with the tariffs, it's going to bring jobs back here.
Yeah.
But the problem is that we have a huge skills gap in the United States. We are not skilled workers. We don't
Yeah.
do work with our hands. We've decided that education over the last, I mean, anybody who, if you were born in the 80s and the 90s, everything was education. Go to college, go to college, go to college, get an education, get an education. We're starting to see a resurgence in the trades, but
Yeah.
that's now. That's not,
Yeah.
you got to train these people to do 10 years from now work.
Yeah.
So we're talking like a decade before we actually have the skills that we need to serve the needs of all of the consumers that we have here in the US. Louis Vuitton tried to bring over 6 years ago part of their they tried to reshore part of their manufacturing process in Texas. And it took 3 years for Americans to learn just to sew one pocket onto the Neverfull bag. And they wasted 40% of the raw material. So this whole idea of like going over, we've already sent everything overseas and they are very, very skilled at
Yeah.
what they do. And that's why they're able, part of the reason they're able to provide the prices that they're able to provide. And there's also
Yeah.
just a lot more people.
Yeah.
So I think it can be, it's going to be interesting to see what happens. Yeah, it's it's gonna be. I'm a little concerned, quite frankly. I mean, we did just hear the president say there's gonna be uh buy your kid one $2 instead of 30 or something like that. okay?
I think if you're not concerned right now, you're not paying attention.
I
So,
just feel like that meme of that dog that's sitting in the room with the flames behind it, like sipping
yeah,
coffee, like, this is fine. This is
yeah,
fine.
yeah,
And I just feel like all I'm trying to do is set my clients up to be as successful as they can be and to be as nimble as they can be because I think
yeah,
we're going to see some business failures. We're going to see some, and if you can shore stuff up to start
yeah.
over quickly and easily, that's really what we're trying to do is keep the assets as protected as possible for those businesses.
Yeah, I think that that's really important. And I think the other side of it is, again, it goes back to it's not necessarily right or wrong to have an employee or an independent contractor, and you have to do what's right for that role.
That's right.
But one of the things that we're trying to do at Birth Smarter is grow in a way where everybody who works at Birth Smarter knows that they are as valuable as we can communicate in
Yep.
whatever way that is with their employment status, with their hourly rate wage, if they're paid hourly, with whatever benefits we can afford to provide as a tiny business,
Yeah.
so that when we have to cut back on payroll, or when we have to cancel a class and cut somebody's hours, or when recently, just in a few months ago, we were supposed to gather for an in-person retreat, and we were like, that's not happening. Sorry, everybody. Like, keep your e-credit, right? We're going to have you fly in a few months, but like, we have to make some decisions based on our operating cash flow.
Right.
And everybody who works for us, I'm like so proud to say, is like, yeah, makes total sense because we're going to do what's best for the company because
That's
this
right.
feels as collaborative as it can. And
That's right.
so that would be like the urge that I have for folks is, while you're building and figuring it out, like, be as transparent as you can be, and don't put your people over your profits, but make sure that they're equal in a for-profit landscape.
Yes, as much as you can, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, and I think a big part of this theme is sort of make sure that you're building your business in the way that want to aim to continue moving forward.
Yeah.
It's really hard to start one way because I did it, right? Like I started, I was like, I'm never going to have employees because it's too hard,
Yeah.
right? You just think of it as too hard. And so you set your business up one way and you wind up having no policies, no systems, no procedures, no nothing because you're like,
Yeah.
well, I'm never doing this. It's just me. I'm never going there. I don't need to worry about that. And then one day you wake up and you're like, oh, if I want to scale, I need people that are, reliable, committed, and actually believe in what it is that I'm doing.
Yeah.
Those are employees. Those aren't independent contractors. Independent contractors are like, here's the work. I'm done. See
Yeah.
you later. So you get to this point where you're like, oh, shoot, like I really
Yeah.
do need to hire people. Let me go fix everything because you can't have a good company culture if people can't measure success in the business, if they don't know how
Mhm.
to measure themselves. Like, how do I tell if I'm doing a good job or not?
Yeah.
If they don't have KPIs, they're never going to be happy. If they don't have bonding experiences, they're never going to be happy. And so you cannot build good quality company culture without systems, policies, and procedures in place.
I mean, yes, and I think what's so interesting about it is that it should just be said that you and I represent like an ilk of businesses that have fallen out of fashion for a long time. For the last 15 years, it was like you either work completely for yourself and you are a freelancer,
Yep.
or you go raise 2 to $200 million and you build the VC backed
Right.
unicorn. And that those were the only conversations being had, and we lost like years of resources being created for people who want to start a business and have it make some money and then hire an employee and then hire the next
Right.
employee.
And then maybe not sell it for $6 billion. Maybe find a way to retire out of it by
Yeah,
giving it to your employees or
yeah,
by, like there's lots of ways companies can work. And to be quite honest, I think some of these freelancers, especially now that we see a lot of people are like, well, I'll just go be an influencer. Right. I mean, we're seeing a lot
yeah,
of that now where people are like, well, I'll just go yap on social media. And
yeah,
that's how I'm going to make my money. Those people that become successful, if you're making six figures doing freelance work, you're a business.
yeah,
I'm sorry, but you are. And you should have a business structure set up for yourself
yeah,
because you're missing out.
yeah. Okay, I don't wanna take more of your time. I'm, like,
Okay.
so excited. What, else do you want people to know about Trestle Law and where to find you?
Well, you can find me on all platforms. You can find me here on YouTube, on Instagram, on Facebook, on TikTok, on LinkedIn, and it's all at Trestle Law. You can also
Great.
find me, Kristen Roberts, online. I'm the owner. I have my own social medias as well. And then our website, trestlelaw.com. It's Trestle. I feel like the spelling of our law firm is a litmus test for working with us. Like, if you can't spell it, you can't find us. No. But it's like Trestle Castle,
Yeah.
you know how Castle has an STLE at the end? It's the
Yeah, yeah,
same,
yeah.
Trestle
We'll
law.com.
find it.
You can find me. It's easy.
Yeah,
I'm findable. Just
great.
Google me. Google me.
And I will just say that we have had such a good experience working with you and the firm for employee handbooks, for licensing agreements, for all the subgroups of employee
Yeah.
agreements that you didn't even know. A meal waiver, I found that out. That was new to
Yeah.
me. Maybe
Yeah.
the meal
Yeah.
waiver.
Somebody works
Um,
less than six hours or less a day, they can waive their meal break, but that has to be in writing and they have to be able to
Yep.
take it back.
So, having all of the logo for Birth Smarter this year became a little duck. It's like a rubber ducky at the bottom of our
Oh,
website. It's an Easter egg that it
cute.
squeaks. And so this year we named the duck Fundy. It's for fundus, which is the top of your
Yeah,
uterus.
yeah,
It's the
yeah.
part that, like, yeah, all right, cool.
You know, you measure it. They measure it. I remember I got measured.
Exactly.
I remember they measured my fundus when I was pregnant.
Yeah, so we named the duck Fundy after Fundus, and so now, like, internally, whenever we say having all your ducks in a row, it's just having all your fundies in a row.
That's cute. I like it.
It is a real relief to hit a place as a business owner with the financial and bookkeeping support, with the legal support from Trestle, to be able to put my head on the pillow at night and know that everybody signed all the appropriate forms, we're paying all the appropriate taxes, we are doing things to both protect me as the owner and the organization and everybody who works there, and hopefully sort of modeling how you figure that out as somebody
Yeah.
who never got an MBA.
I hear you. I hear you. Well,
Yeah.
I'm really glad to be working with you, and I think your business is really great, and I think it's shaking up the business model in the industry, which I think is important. So,
Well, thank you. Okay.
all
Have a
right.
great
You
day.
too. Okay.
Okay. Bye,
Bye.
everybody.